So, now the topic today, why Bharat matters. We are all a few days away from making a big decision about our country. It is a decision which many of us will make, some of us with our own personal interest, some with that of a family, maybe of community, maybe of business, of organization. Some of us will make it with the viewpoint of the state. But it is very important that we make it also keep taking into account our country. So which button you press, please bear in mind that that decision which we will make individually actually has a collective impact not only on the country, it has a collective impact on the world. Because as I will share with you today, what is happening with us, where we are going, at what speed we are going, with how much success we are going, all these things today have an enormous implication for the world. Now, I can summarize this why Bharat matters in 2 sentences. I can say why Bharat matters because we have all changed. Why Bharat matters because today Prime Minister Modi is leading us. Full stop. But I have a larger case to make before you. And before I do that, I want to give you some examples of why and how Bharat has mattered. I refer to the G20 summit. When we took over the presidency, the chairship of the G20, to be very honest with you, this was in December of 2022. Most countries felt sorry for us, if I'm being very frank with you. Most countries felt, okay, India has taken this over, they're going to have a very difficult problem. Everybody is going to quarrel with everybody. I don't know how these people are going to manage it. And yet, in September of 2023, we were on the first day of the summit able to persuade everybody to come around to a consensus position on the most important issues of the day. So, I give you that example because when people say why Bharat matters, we are today in a very unique position. There is a tension, a very deep division between countries of the West and Russia and to some extent China also. There are big issues between the developed countries of the North and the developing countries of the South. But here is India, which has this ability of actually bridging it, of taking positions which everybody regards as fair and reasonable, and actually creating a consensus. There are not many countries today that can do this. But let me take you to a very different example. All of us in the last few years went through what I think was the most difficult experience of our lifetime. There was a reason why it was called once in a century happening. I'm talking about the COVID. There's not a single person in this room, probably not a single person in the country or the world, whose life was not impacted, was not affected by the COVID. Now, when COVID started, I'm now going back to January of 2020. People had just discovered that this pandemic is there. And there was a meeting of world leaders. It actually was a G20 meeting, it was virtual. And there was a presentation made how this COVID cannot be stopped, how it will spread through every country in the world, how millions of people could die of this pandemic. And I must tell you, the biggest concern in the room was actually what will happen to India. Because the general belief at that time in the world, among all the governments, among the UN organizations, WHO, everybody, was if there was any country which would have a problem, the biggest problem would be in India. This was January of 2020. And yet, what did we see? Yes, we had a problem. But we also saw we had a deep national ability, a resolve. We went through the lockdown. We were able to set up COVID centers, a country which did not even produce masks. I remember as a foreign minister instructing my ambassador saying, please buy masks anywhere you can find it. A country which could not produce masks within a matter of a few months was producing PPEs, was producing ventilators, was producing medicines, which was able to increase its pharmaceutical industry 4 or 5 times, and which finally ended up as one of the major vaccine suppliers of the world. So think about it. But then let us look after COVID. I still travel a lot, that's my job, I am the foreign minister. But when I go around the world, I must tell you, a lot of countries have not recovered from the COVID. That they are actually psychologically so scarred, they are economically so shattered, that their ability to come out of it and get back to normal life is not there. And in India, what we have seen is not just coming out of COVID. We have actually got back to a 7% growth rate. That in many ways, the kind of momentum which we had started before COVID, we were able to pick up on it and resume it. A country which 10 years ago was considered one of the fragile 5, one of the 5 most likeliest economies to actually go down, today has ended up in the top 5. So, this too is something we need to reflect on, because when we live in a society and all these things happen around us, we take it for granted. We think it is natural. I am telling you, take it from me as a person who travels around the world, it is not natural. It requires a leadership, it requires policies, it requires people to rise to the challenge. It requires a certain national will and a collective determination. Now, sometimes we also are capable of feats which capture the imagination of the world. So if you ask somebody saying, okay, India, tell me something about what is it you remember, what is it which has impressed you? I can tell you in the last 1 year, probably the one achievement we have done which has impressed the world is actually the landing of Chandrayaan 3. And I happened to be at that time traveling with Prime Minister Modi. We were in South Africa for the BRICS summit. There were about 45 presidents and prime ministers. There were a lot of guests who were there. And that evening, because in the middle of the summit, Prime Minister went out to actually see the landing, talk to the ISRO people. That evening, when he actually came, I must tell you, he got what was a standing ovation for Bharat, which was the entire room, all these 45 people. Actually, for them, it was almost like it was also their achievement. Actually, the South African president said that the entire global South feels today that India has done something for which we are collectively proud. Now, I can give you many other examples. All of us today, our life revolves around the phone. I see a lot of people holding it. Last thing before we go to sleep, first thing when we get up, right? Now, what makes that phone work? Technology. Think about it 15 years ago. even 10 years ago. Remember 2G, 3G? I'm not talking of the scandal, I'm talking of technology. Okay? So 2G, 3G, 4G. We imported it from Europe and from China. Today, we are the fastest deploying 5G country in the world, but more important, that 5G stack is an Indian 5G stack. So I think all of us need to ask ourselves, why is it that we did not do 2G, we did not do 3G, we did not do 4G, but yet we put our minds to it, somebody gave us motivation, there was a push, there was a talent there, the people had not changed. And we were actually able to come up with a 5G technology. And I can tell you with a great deal of confidence, I actually see our 5G stack going out of India to other countries as well. So, what I want, the point I'm making is when we today put our minds to it, before I come to why Bharat matters, we have the ability somewhere in us, with the right choice, with the right determination, with the right leadership, to make Bharat happen, make Bharat matter.